Well, hey, folks, and thanks for joining us. My name is Jake Milstein. Today, we are here to talk about the Federal Health and Human Services Cybersecurity Performance Goals. They've been out for a little while. So we're going to talk about, did the feds go too far? Did they not go far enough? And give some opinions on this. Interestingly, since we first said, "Hey, we should do this webinar," a lot of things have happened in healthcare and outside of healthcare, including other sectors now getting cybersecurity performance goals. So I see I'm looking in the audience. I see some of you in healthcare, some of you are not. And we'll talk through all of that. And as people get into the room here, just a reminder, if you haven't joined our events before, or if you have, there's a chat on the right. Hop in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. I am in a basement in Seattle. It is pouring rain because it's February in Seattle, and that's what it does. But it's very nice to have you join us for this discussion today, especially because I know there are a lot of conferences going on right now in warmer places than Seattle. So anyway, yes, see, Sander is joining from a sunny Arizona. Okay, so reminder, chat's on the right. If the chat is dinging for you, there's a little bell at the top, and you can click it, and it will make it not ding. Or if you want it to ding, you can have it ding by hitting that bell. Everybody will get a recording of this. The system will send you a recording. Systems don't always work perfectly, especially webinar systems. So we'll also send it out in an email, and we'll put it on our YouTube channel, youtube.com, and then the Critical Insight channel. And we will send out the slide deck because I know people want it. So who are we? If you don't know us, Critical Insight in the healthcare sector is the preferred cybersecurity provider for SOC services for the American Hospital Association and hospital associations in Idaho, Kansas, Missouri, Minnesota, and North Dakota. I see there are also a lot of folks here from the public sector. Obviously, I think about half of our business is public sector, half of our business is healthcare. And we're joined today by one of our technology partners at Armis. Mo is joining us, and we really appreciate you being here. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jake. Hey, everybody. I'm Mohammed Wakas, also known as Mo. I'm the CTO for healthcare here at Armis, and a little bit about my background is I've worked directly for large healthcare organizations, helping build the information security program from the ground up, everything from bringing in security technologies, being hit by ransomware a couple of times, got some battle scars there, as well as helping mature from a governance aspect as well. And in terms of just a little bit about background about Armis, we're the industry-leading cybersecurity asset intelligence platform, where we're helping healthcare organizations and critical infrastructure entities globally get a handle on their asset inventory, but also providing them a complete contextualized risk assessment to help proactively reduce their attack surface so that they're not impacted by all the different ransomware and cyber attacks that we're seeing across the industry today. So happy to be here, and thanks so much for the invite.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And we invited Mo for a couple of reasons. Number one is when we get into the CPGs, it says asset. And well, that's what they do. And number two is he was just at Vive, which is a conference in LA, healthcare conference put on by Chime, if you're familiar with that group. And they talked about some stuff at that conference that he'll be able to talk about here that will be helpful. Also joining us today, Fred Langston and Mike Hamilton founded Critical Insight. Fred has been doing healthcare cybersecurity for 30 years and was on the original group that put the writing together for the HIPAA security rule. Mike was the CISO of the city of Seattle. And I put Mike on all the webinars because he's always very entertaining. Not to say Fred's not, but Mike.
Mike unfortunately reports to Jake these days.
Yeah, see. And my name's Jake Milstein. I am CMO, which in this case means marketing, not medical. And I host all of our events. And one of the roles that I play is if you put questions in the chat, I love interrupting the panelists to bring up your questions. Okay, so we'd be crazy today, on February 28th if we didn't start with the news. So the news that's happening right now, and just so everybody knows, we're going to talk about the news, we're going to talk about some perspective on the CPGs, and then in about 15 minutes, we're going to tick through the CPGs and take you through each one. So just so you know what to expect. So the biggest thing going on right now, obviously, the Change Healthcare breach. Change is part of Optum. People have called it the United Healthcare breach, the Optum breach, the Change breach. But it's become a problem across the U.S. In fact, just this morning I heard from my dad he can't get his prescription. So, big problem here. Fred, can you give folks the latest on this one?
Sure. What we know now, at least what has been speculated, again, we don't have official notification from Change Optum exactly what happened, but we believe it was a ConnectWise recent or 0 day, probably at the time, vulnerability. This particular vulnerability has the U.S. government notifying anybody that if you have this, that you need to pull this down, and they're actually even shutting off any unpatched versions of this. Why? Because these particular types of solutions allow access into systems like this and ultimately into all the records. So we believe they took advantage of a 0 day. It was the Alpha 5/Black Cat. What does this mean? Well, what it means is Black Cat was, if you remember, taken out by the U.S. government about a year ago. Well, they really aren't taken out. They have kind of a new name, and they're back at full strength. What else does this mean? It means, is this all about records? Because this is the jackpot. We've gotten to the point now where we've consolidated so much in healthcare that records, you get one big provider and you get everybody. That's a problem. And then the other is, and you could disrupt maybe the entire U.S. economy or our culture by diminishing and eroding away the capabilities of these major providers to provide basic services. So this is big, folks. It has implications and repercussions that are going to go far deeper than just, hey, it was a 0 day hack.
It's destabilizing. There's a lot that it meets the strategic goals of countries who don't like us. So is it criminal? Is it nation? I don't think we know. I think it's also interesting that the Lurie Children's Hospital, now they're saying that was the gang that did that was the Reseda gang. And this is exactly the one that the American Hospital Association wrote a bulletin about, said, watch out for these guys. And there they are.
And I think if I can add on, just looking at the impact of Change Healthcare as an example, we read about it in articles in terms of how many organizations are going through this. But here at the Vive conference as well, we do have executives here, but they're all running around. They're all taking calls in between, trying to figure out how they get back to an operational state. And really that Change Healthcare cyber attack, it's starting to really evolve from a targeting a specific healthcare delivery organization and kind of just that one hospital to really targeting elements that are more of service providers and payers that a whole bunch of different organizations will connect to. So almost like a hub and spoke type of impact of these types of cyber attacks. So we're seeing a lot more impact for a very concentrated cyber attack. So,
yeah, for sure. For sure. So, and I know a lot of people in the audience are probably dealing with the impacts as well. Or even if you're not dealing with the impacts, you're hearing about them and your board, CEO, CFO, whatever, is saying to you, hey, should we be worried about this? So, we may do a panel about that in the future. Okay. So, but we're here to talk about, but, it's in the grand scope of that. Okay. So we're here at this junction because of all of the ransomware attacks, whether we're talking about ransomware attacks on critical access hospitals or clinics or large hospitals or large systems or, large business associates, right? So what happened is in 2021, because of everything that was going on, the Biden administration strengthened CISA, which is the federal cyber agency, to improve cybersecurity for public and private entities. Then in 2023, the White House Cyber Strategy and other federal action directed critical infrastructure, so that includes healthcare, to align to the NIST cybersecurity framework, which we're going to talk about in a little bit because there's news there this week too. Healthcare continues to bear the brunt of cyber attacks. I just saw another study that the bad guys believe, and it may be true, that healthcare is the most likely to pay a ransom. So why do we keep getting attacked? Well, because, patient safety, insurers pay the ransom, problem. And so then last month, the HHS released the 20 CPGs that we're going to talk to today, and they said they were going to be voluntary. And a lot of people are like, are they going to stay voluntary? So we'll talk about that today as well. But I do want to talk about all these things that are going on. So just this week, the government officially released NIST CSF 2.0. There's also 405D. There's HICCUP. Yes, that's how you pronounce HICP, and the CPGs. Fred, can you put all of these into context for folks?
Yeah, and I'm going to work backwards from why I hear people are having a lot of affinity for the CPGs, surprisingly. And I think that's because it's not a standard you get measured against. There's no audit. People are not looking at it going, I'm going to be audited. I have to do this. I think people are looking at this going, I can be very flexible. I can approach this the way I want to approach this based on these particular categories. I can sell this now to my board and to the people that need to pay for this and show that we have some goals that we can achieve and we can knock these off. So I think it's the approach that has made it incredibly popular. But we still have to, if we're doing our HIPAA risk assessment, still need to align with the NIST CSF 2.0, much better, and a lot of companion documentation that will help align you with the NIST 2.0, crosswalking that to the CPGs. So there's an understanding that this has to be an ecosystem where these things have to be able to be connected together and thought of coherently. And the way you use them really is kind of their different tools, maybe for different needs.
And
can I add something to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, Mo, I know, you've done work on these, and we're going to go to another slide in a minute about another thing. But, in terms of your work with hospitals, how do these all align together?
Yeah, I think what I really like about these is the fact that they're coming from the HHS and more of a kind of a governing body, if you will. Now, to Fred's point, it's not like a mandatory reporting exercise, which can decrease the efficacy. So if you look at, for example, the NHS out in the UK, they have yearly reporting requirements, but it kind of became hey, it's due June 30th, June 1st. Let's figure out how we just kind of check the boxes, right? So it just kind of almost became a burdensome compliance quick exercise to meet the regulatory requirements. But what I do like about this is the fact that as well from NIST 2.0, really that focus on governance, because it's much more of just a cybersecurity team effort of trying to go through this as an individual entity, but really that governance structure really helps enforce that cybersecurity kind of culture up top, that it is, cyber safety is patient safety. That's the tagline with even the strategy, the 5-year strategic plan, which I'll talk about. But the ability and the crosswalk that's happening, and also the expansion when we're looking at HICCUP, the fact that they're separately calling out an entire section for medical device security, it's expanding the scope beyond IT assets and helping organizations start and embark on that journey of that kind of holistic cybersecurity of their entire environment.
And Mike, you wanted to add?
I do. So this is not the extent of the guidance that's been given to the healthcare sector about cybersecurity. There's another one called the Healthcare and Public Health Sector Cybersecurity Framework Implementation Guide. And I think it's important to go back even a little further. This is in March 2023, the federal government released cross-sector CPGs that nobody ever talked about. And they were more focused on operational technology, third-party supply chain kinds of things. And these health sector CPGs are a subset of those cross-sector CPGs, which are more detailed. And it looks to me that the federal government is really trying hard to walk the line between regulation and voluntary adoption of practices. And I think at some point you talk about, well, will these be mandatory? I think the direction that they're heading in is that if you implement the performance goals and you have some kind of event, a ransomware event, or whatever, records disclosure, whatever, you're provided a little safe harbor from regulatory action. they can't provide safe harbor from the private right of action, right? Class action suits and things like that. But they can provide, some benefit there for adopting these. And I think, given what happened to the EPA and they got shouted down after they tried to regulate the water sector, I think this is the federal government really trying to use more market forces than anything else to achieve these outcomes.
I'll say, Sander has a comment here, which is some items are helpful, waiting for the point that the C-level board is required to buy in. So 2 weeks ago, I was at the American Hospital Association Rural Conference, which is pretty much all. I mean, there's some IT directors, some CIOs there, but it's mostly trustees, board members, CFOs, CEOs, COOs. And I saw more buy-in and more interest in the CPGs than I've ever seen in anything. When we did a presentation on it with the AHA's John Rigi, more people came to that presentation than I've ever seen. And I think, and when we get to it, I think it's the simplicity of having 20 things. And people left saying, okay, I'm going to ask my IT director, my IT manager, my CIO, whoever, how we align to these 20 things. Because looking at, all of the things in this CSF or look at 405D, it goes over their heads. And so, Sander, for the C-level board thing, I actually think the stuff we talk about in the CPGs today is what had captured their attention. And, they have also seen some of the prosecutions that have happened in the last year, and that had captured their attention as well. It's not, some of the HIPAA fines, but also, even if it's tangential, the Uber and SolarWinds thing have, even if it's not healthcare related, even if it's different, they'd heard about it. And Mo, I'd interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, not a problem. I think, Michael, you had a great point as well. The fact that they're coming out as voluntary, even if they evolve to be mandatory, I think this period is almost being able to assess the efficacy and giving folks the runway they need to be able to start down a path of implementation, start down the path of a systematic maturity that they can meet these cybersecurity performance goals and not necessarily be impacted that, day one, this is going to be mandatory. We're going to assess you. We might, link it to funding and some other aspects of it, but organizations may just start embarking on this, and that's going to prove challenging. It's, some organizations may not necessarily elevate cybersecurity to the point of, a more mature assessment to the board and things of that nature, which really have a deep-rooted approach to these. So I think that's a great point that you raised there.
Yeah, and I agree with you, because fundamentally, this guidance is no different, except in the packaging, than any other guidance that's been given.
Yeah, and Mo, just yesterday at this conference you're at, the Health Sector Coordinating Council came out with a 5-year plan. Can you tell people what this one's about?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was unveiled just yesterday at Vive. And it's a 5-year plan that's been put together. It's the Healthcare Industry Cybersecurity Strategic Plan. And what they're really looking to accomplish and what they've laid out is what they're going to do, or what some goals are, what some trends even are. And I'll break that down in a few minutes, of how do we get the healthcare cybersecurity posture, which is, it's deemed critical right now. How do we get it to more of a stable state? Right? How do we get that maturity to grow across all the different healthcare entities, but not only healthcare delivery organizations, but really the entirety of the healthcare ecosystem? So it includes payers, it includes medical device manufacturers, includes pharma, and of course, and as well, policymakers. So implementing that foundational level cybersecurity programs to address the various different technological and also governance challenges. Now, one of the key aspects I think that I really like about this plan is that shared responsibility is a reoccurring theme that we're seeing throughout the strategic plan. So in terms of some of the complexities, before we jump in, some of the complexity that were called out were also very interesting, in the sense of what's also complicating the healthcare cybersecurity landscape is, if we look at the services, the ecosystem that's now in healthcare entities globally, the focus was on how do we streamline patient care delivery. So there was a lot of digitization that was happening. There was a lot of smart devices, smart processes, and things of that nature being introduced. Cybersecurity was maybe an afterthought, right? And this was a couple of years ago. Now, the other part is what we saw with healthcare organizations in the landscape is very slow adoption over previous years, but now we're seeing a very quick adoption in terms of, if you look at AI, if you look at smart devices and, telemedicine and all that stuff. So we're seeing a very, almost like an inflection point of healthcare kind of being the slower industry to adopt change to really almost leading the way in terms of adopting newer technologies. So
yeah, interesting. And as somebody said at the other conference I was at, seeing IT not as a cost center but as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Because all the different innovations in patient care, now they're needing IT to adopt newer infrastructure. So historically, especially in my previous life, when you hear of cloud infrastructure as part of any healthcare service or any healthcare solution, it was automatically a no. But now it's cybersecurity, and especially during COVID, when we're seeing that acceleration and adoption of all the remote technologies, cybersecurity and IT teams needed to keep up to help enable the patient innovation. So part of it is poorly understood dependencies was called out here, as well as inherited and unknown security weaknesses. So how do these medical systems, service providers, how do they operate? What is required when there's a new vulnerability? How am I impacted? So how do you do that in holistic assessment of risk in your environment if you don't necessarily understand how devices might be operating, but also how are they interlinked and what are the dependencies, including on kind of a smaller scale, let's say on the software level, but also on a macro system level. The other part that was explicitly called out, I think is a great step forward, is as part of that ecosystem, as I mentioned, payers, pharma, et cetera, it also called out third-party technology and service providers, which I think is a very, very good step forward because it's shining a light on, we kind of dealt with third-party risk management almost as a silo and kind of separated that from patient care services. But now we're bringing that into the fold and we're saying, hey, this we understand is critical, right? Take a look at how Change Healthcare, as an example, is impacting a whole bunch of different organizations. We're bringing that into the fold. So let's talk about some of the goals of this strategic plan. First and foremost, it's a matter of maturing cybersecurity to a point that it is flexible and it's evolving to match and meet the evolving trends in technology that's coming down. So a prime example of this is AI, right? What we're trying to change with the strategic plan is that healthcare isn't necessarily reactive, right? A couple of years into the AI thing, once it's been adopted, now we're starting to think about the cybersecurity elements behind it. Rather, it's positioning cybersecurity and looking at the different trends and the implications that has on cybersecurity, whether it's establishing policies, whether it's establishing cybersecurity practices. And the big key part here is mapping and tying trends in the next 5 years to the different goals associated with each of those trends, objectives from a cybersecurity perspective, and of course, measurable outcomes. And the measurable outcomes, I think, is a common theme that we're seeing across all the different frameworks that we just discussed in the previous slide. And that's critical because we're taking it away from a theoretical kind of approach to cybersecurity to saying, here's how you can tell and measure your success and measure your maturity as you're going through quarter over quarter, year over year. That, and I think it's a matter of another quick example that I'll give before wrapping this up is the trends are looking at much more than technology trends, right? If you look at one of the things that they explicitly called out as a trend is the acute impact on budgets. So the budget constraints aren't going to go away in 6 months, but what impact, that ripple effect that it has, leading to mergers and acquisitions, leading to budgets being cut, leading to a number of different impacts that cybersecurity would be involved in. So how do we securely enable a merger and acquisition? So looking at this, promoting that cyber safety is patient safety, that shared responsibility element, and then positioning cybersecurity that it's an enabler of business. Those are really the key elements from the strategic plan. Now, obviously, I can go on for talking about this, but really, I'd encourage everyone to check it out, especially the trends. It's very well put through.
And I do want to highlight for folks that there's a lot There's a lot out there that's guidance for you. And I know for a lot of folks, like, you're a 1, 2, 3 person IT shop. And how do you do all of these? So one of the things that's really captured people's attention is the CPGs, because they're simpler. And so we're going to go through those. So, there are 20 goals, 20 cybersecurity performance goals, and they're cut into 2 categories, essential and enhanced. And as we go through these, I want everybody to think about why there are 2 categories. And we're going to get into them, and we'll talk about them as we go, because the criminals are clearly enhanced. So, I know that they were trying to prioritize, but it's weird that there are 2 categories. Like, oh, if we're essential, we'll be fine. No, you won't. But they do address the most common attack areas for healthcare organizations. There's a lot about vulnerabilities, which, by the way, underlined by the Change Healthcare thing, right? They didn't click on an email. I mean, if the reporting's right, they didn't click on an email. That's not how the bad guys got in. All right. So we're going to go through all 20, and there are 10 essential and then 10 enhanced. The first one is mitigate known vulnerabilities. Sound familiar? And what they say is reduce the likelihood of threat actors exploiting known vulnerabilities. I guess this one was known, but the breach organizational networks that are directly accessible to the network. Fred, what does that mean?
It means a whole bunch of things. It means vulnerability assessment on a regular basis. It means web app and penetration testing on probably at least an annual basis or upon major changes. It means attack surface management, where you understand what things you're exposing to the external world on which you may be attacked. It is the policy and the procedure and the process that underlies all those. So it's everything about understanding your exposures, the risk associated with those from a technical perspective.
And in terms of vulnerabilities will come up here a number of times. Mike, we've seen vulnerabilities. We've seen bad guys getting in through vulnerabilities become the number one way healthcare gets attacked. It is not email anymore.
Yes, the last deep dive we did into the healthcare data breach, I think it was the second half of last year, it was clear that there was a transition away from phishing as an initial access vector to vulnerability exploit. And now we see this happen all the time. What was the last Avanti software for remote access, the Move It file transfer program, when something has a vulnerability announced and a patch is issued, there are teams of people that will reverse engineer the patch, figure out what it breaks so that they can develop the exploit simultaneously. The scanning of the internet for vulnerable exposures starts immediately. And so we're looking at just, really broad scale compromise every time something goes wrong. And so, they're trying to address this and say, you've got to be serious about this, especially for your publicly facing stuff. You're facing the great untrusted network, the internet. You got to be super serious about that. So when those vulnerabilities are announced, it's an incident. Drop what you're doing, because the race is on.
Yeah. So Fred, the next one, email security, reduce risk from common email-based threats such as email spoofing, phishing, fraud.
Sure. So there's a bunch of technical controls we're all familiar with, email, phishing prevention, but it's really about training your users and making sure they have a way to identify if something is a phishing email. There should be a way for them to not say, well, I'm going to guess and I'm going to click on it, right? Because it might be real. It might be a work email. So you have to give them a way to figure that out. So it's really about the human at this point. We've got some nice controls in place. Let's worry about the human at this point.
And multi-factor authentication. By the way, you've needed this for a long time if you want cyber insurance. But, Fred, we still don't see it in every environment we look at.
It kills me. Everybody thinks I've got it on my email. I've got MFA. No. MFA is email, it's any remote access, it's any privileged access to any system on your internal network, it's anytime you're accessing a software as a service application. There are probably a half a dozen other places where multi-factor should be implemented. So it is really thinking about every place you're accessing critical data and using privileged access to those systems. That's where MFA has to be.
I'd extend that to your personal email too, because I know y'all share passwords between all kinds of stuff. So,
out of curiosity, this does not, Fred, cover having a password manager, though. That is not covered in this.
No, it's not. And hopefully we're moving away to things that are a little bit more convenient to use, like pass keys. Although I'm not sold on that yet. I'm still an old hardware token person that believes something you have literally in your hand is really the most secure approach. So it all depends on your risk level.
And basic cybersecurity training. So, ensuring organizational users learn and perform more secure behaviors. This is basic. Why basic here?
This is your firewall for gullibility. It's because, what do they say? 80%, writ large, not necessarily concentrated in the health sector, but 80% of incidents, events start with somebody giving up a password or doing, hitting a website they never should have accessed. And if you're not training your people, you're not addressing the 80% part of the problem. So it's got to be on the basic side.
And I think if I can just make a quick comment here as well, I think organizations should also make sure that the cybersecurity training they're providing is also updated, because multi-factor authentication, we're seeing a lot of attacks, trying to harvest the actual one-time password, even though they have a 60-second window, and they're proceeding and they're able to actually get folks to provide that. So I think that it's very important that the cybersecurity training isn't just focused on email security and things of that nature. It should stay up to date with the cybersecurity practices of the organization.
Yeah, and the deep fakery that we're being subjected to, and the AI written phishing bait that is very convincing, right? I mean, we have to up our game in our training.
Oh no,
Absolutely.
the bad guys aren't going to use AI. I don't know what you're talking about. And then strong encryption. So deploy encryption to maintain confidentiality of sensitive data and integrity of IT and operational technology, traffic in motion. Fred, how do you do that one?
Well, clearly it's a big job. You have at rest and you have in motion. But what I really tell people is get to the point where you feel you have your encryption in place and monitor for unencrypted sensitive traffic on your network. That's the way to tell when you miss something or something's not in place, is when you see unencrypted EPHI going across the network. You probably have a real problem, right? So get as much in place, monitor. That will tell you the loose ends that you need to pick up.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that when we plugged into a new client and saw people's health information going to a debt collector in the clear. That's not good.
And you got to ask yourself too, does an insulin pump have enough CPU power to support encryption? And the answer is no. So I don't know.
Sorry,
go ahead, Mo.
I was just going to say, it's great to see operational technology explicitly called out here, but being called out in the strong encryption as an essential cybersecurity performance goal, that's a pretty big ask to be able to get that visibility, to be able to map it, to be able to see if they even support those capabilities. So great to see it called out. That might be a bit more complex than enabling encryption for more standardized IT assets.
And, and so then the next 5 under essential: revoke credentials for departing workforce members. I know there's a non-hospital organization that's having a problem with this now because they have somebody who left the organization 3 years ago and sold their password to bad guys for, several $1,000s. But, Fred, this one is really about governance.
Yeah, well, let's just look at Microsoft, right? The recent breach at Microsoft was legacy accounts that had been left fallow and they'd kind of forgotten about that. Eventually, the bad guys said, hey, there's a way I could probably take advantage of that account that nobody's really looking at or monitoring anymore. So obviously, one of the key functions of your HR offboarding, your separation process, has to be checks for every system. Don't just turn off AD, folks, and don't just disable them in AD. They've got probably software as a service, maybe 15 places that you need to make sure you're going around and managing. So you also need to know what software as a services people have signed up for to then revoke critical credentials.
And basic incident planning and preparedness. So this one says, ensure safe and effective organizational responses to, restoration of, and recovery from significant cybersecurity incidents. So is this, it doesn't say backups. This is more IR planning, Fred?
Yeah, here's where I quarrel with this. Basic shouldn't be on here. Okay, this can't be basic,
Yeah.
people. It cannot. You need this to have this well practiced. If you need to be able to play a concerto in Carnegie Hall on the drop of a dime if you're in the middle of an incident. So I would suggest you take the basic off of this and really focus heavily here to make sure that you can respond quickly and all the decisions. Paying ransom, what are the boundaries for paying ransom in healthcare? There may be some, all sorts of decisions, CMO decisions. Do I need to move my patients? Who do I move them to? Have I set up agreements already? Have we got mutual aid set up? All these questions need to be part of it. You don't even think of those as cybersecurity, but those are critical to a tabletop exercise and helping you get ready for a potential incident.
And
And I
especially the communication team as well, because I will say that, the event that's underway right now, they're doing a spectacular job on communications, right? Change is really doing a good job.
And I was just going to add on, completely agree with both of you. And, Fred, you raised a great point. I think when it comes to healthcare cybersecurity teams, a lot of times the scope is defined or, just automatically becomes them or IT, where really the tabletop exercise is the organizational response needs to include clinical departments, facilities departments, communication departments, really departments all across to really gauge how effective your response would be to whether it's a downtime experienced and so on.
Yeah, so by the way, I know you said Change is doing a good job with their communication. I was on an interesting panel. So for folks who don't know my background, I ran newsrooms for a long time and worked for CBS, NBC, and ABC affiliates. And, it's a lot easier to do crisis communications when you're reporting to businesses as opposed to consumers. And for those in the audience who, you're reporting to consumers, to patients, to families, it's a lot harder to do communication and do communication well when you're dealing with the public. And that's really hard. And so I would say in your incident planning and preparedness, hit me up. I'll give you a list of questions journalists are going to ask you. Like, I have a list of that. I'll give it to you. Like, it's harder than you think it is. And those people need to be part of your incident planning preparedness. And just like we said, by the way, in one of our other webinars, the bad guys are going to start contacting your patients.
Yep.
They're going to go right over you after you say no to the $5 million ransom. They're going to call your patients and say, hey, we have your data for, $50. We'll take it off the web. And those patients are going to call you, and you got to be ready for that. Okay. And then Annie in the chat says, I have a family member who works for Optum. He said, while there's very little official information going on internally for employees, there are areas where people have been told not to come to work because they have no usable systems. And while there have been incidents in the past, this is by far the worst he's ever seen. Yeah. And, there's a real interesting note in there about internal communication. How do you talk to people internally versus how you talk to people externally? And what work needs to be done and what work can't be done. Fascinating. And again, going back to what Fred started with here, basic is not the right word to be in there. All right.
Especially communicating internally when it's going to leak. You have to be really careful.
Yeah. Unique credentials. Use unique credentials inside organizations' networks to detect anomalous activity and prevent attackers from moving laterally across the organization, particularly between IT and OT networks. Fred, break that one down. And Mo, I'm sure you're going to want to say something on that.
Number one offender. You've got your local admin password all the same on all the workstations because only IT admins are the ones that log in. That's a great way to give anybody access to your entire network. Hard-coded passwords, certainly shared passwords. Having a service provider that is sharing internal. We got one admin password, and they're all sharing it. You need to have that in your contract with them, right? Everywhere. You need to look everywhere. What about people sharing or using the same password every software as a service? That's a great way to get one breach at a provider, and now you've given up the accounts at every other software provider that user is connected to. This is a big deal. You need to understand your credentials, the usage, and if you're smart, you're probably implementing something like a CASB, a security broker, right? that will sit in between. Microsoft offers one, right? As one of their services, where you can connect through that to understand where people are going for their software as a service usage.
Yeah, and I think from an OT perspective, there's quite a few challenges there. But before I dive into that, I do want to point out the fact that it says use unique credentials inside organizations' networks. I would expand that, right? How many cloud platforms exist? Even if you look at IP cameras, things of that nature that might be implemented without the security team knowing, and the physical security team says, this is great. We have a cloud platform we can monitor remotely. But what's the security on that? Have the admin credentials for OT assets actually changed? What about the cloud platforms? Do they have more secure authentication mechanisms as well? Then on top of that, it's in terms of OT assets, do they even have the ability to support unique credentials or support complex credentials as well? In some cases, medical devices, IoT devices, take your pick, they're transmitting things across the wire, not only information related, but their own credentials are being transmitted across the wire unencrypted. So right for the picking, if a workstation gets compromised, being able to pluck some of that out and then connect to all the different systems without necessarily raising flags in the monitoring systems that are in healthcare environments. So that's a very, very interesting one. I would expand the scope on what the essentials has listed here.
Yeah, and I'm going to move us forward here. Separate user and privileged accounts. Fred, what's that one?
Yeah, so if you're an admin, domain admin, do not surf, do not do email under your domain admin credentials. Have a regular user account. It's not going to lock you down from doing all those things that you think it's going to slow you down. You only need to elevate when you're doing something that requires that. Hey, thank you, Microsoft, for adding sudo, by the way. Sudo's finally coming to Microsoft.
Yeah.
So there's a way to make this a lot easier for you Windows folks, right? One of the big complaints we have. But keep in mind, you're logging and auditing if you have process creation turned on and you type an entire string at the command line that has a username and a password, which you can do, you will be recording that in plain text in your logs. Just know your DA credentials will be in plain text in your logs if you're doing it. So that's the best practice not to do. Let it interact with you. Don't use that encapsulated username and password all in one command.
Okay, and the last essential, vendor supplier cybersecurity requirements. Fred, this has been a big topic. Define this one for folks.
Well, this is finally saying the BAA, which was kind of like the first cybersecurity agreement we put in front of the world, right? It needs to mature into a complete cybersecurity document supported by a third-party risk management program that understands the supply chain, that understands the SBOM, software bill of materials, of anything software or even hardware. There's hardware bill of materials as well, to know the provenance of the things that you're bringing into your environment. Because you may be bringing in a massive application, you're also bringing in 15 open source modules and maybe a couple commercial modules that are actually being purchased from people that are not necessarily companies that we have full trust in. So it is the entire world now of third-party risk management that they're saying you need to have this as a well-developed process and technology and process and governance role for any third party that you're bringing into the procurement. And again, it starts in procurement. Everything starts in procurement. If you fail in procurement, you cannot fix it after the fact.
And I think if I just add one quick note is the revoked credentials, the unique credentials, separate user accounts. It starts with doing an assessment today, right?
Yes.
Of what vendors have accounts in my environment, which of them are still active, and which of them are generic versus actual dedicated accounts. So there's definitely steps that you can take right after this to start that assessment.
Yep. Okay, asset. So now we're into enhanced. Now, all right. First of all, before we get to enhanced, I want to say you got to do all 20. Like, you can't just do the first 10, even though some of them said basic. All right, asset inventory. Identify known, unknown, unmanaged assets to more rapidly detect and respond to potential risks and vulnerabilities. Fred, and then Mo. Fred,
yeah.
Go for it.
Well, I don't want to steal Mo's thunder because he's going to say what I think all of us are thinking here. But asset inventory is primary. right? That's why it's number one on the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's line 1 and line 2 is software and then hardware. Yeah, folks, if you don't know what you have, and in particular in the world of IoT, meta IoT, operational technology, and the fact that people are doing shadow IT, your world of asset inventory is actually very complex at this point. It is not just running, Nmap scan and calling it good anymore. You need something much more robust, much more intelligence built into that solution. Mo, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very surprised that asset inventory wasn't in the top 10 kind of essential ones, because all the previous ones that we talked about require what? Visibility. You can't really do a vulnerability assessment of assets that you don't know are on your network. And that's what companies like Armis, we go into an organization, that's our very, very first kind of pillar, is doing that asset inventory and discovery of all your managed and unmanaged. And the unmanaged aspect, I think, is very critical. It's not just IT. Because when you actually look at the cybersecurity, the performance goals, and you open up, you see what the asset inventory is mapped to. In Hiccup, it's actually mapped to IT asset management. So the other aspect for Hiccup is it also calls out medical devices, but there's a whole device ecosystem in a healthcare organization, including your HVAC systems, your building management systems, your elevator panels, that all enable patient care delivery. If the patient cannot get to the care unit, they also cannot access that care. So really, I just want to highlight here that asset inventory should encompass all the different types of assets, including user accounts, including the cloud infrastructure you may have, not necessarily only physical devices.
And, Fred, I'm going to put together here the next two: third-party vulnerability disclosure and third-party incident reporting.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull them apart. I'm actually going to separate them. They're different. Yeah. The first one is, yay. You know what that is? That's what we have been evangelizing here at CI, that if you see a 0-day vulnerability drop, you need to respond as if that's an incident if you have that technology exposed to the risk. It could be externally the internet. It could be a big, huge network at a university, right? And you're exposing it internally, right? So that one is that, in my opinion, they're finally saying you have to prioritize 0-day vulnerabilities and high-risk critical vulnerabilities if they're exposed to a threat actor. Full stop. Drop everything.
But do that for your third parties?
No, this is saying when a third party discloses a vulnerability, what do you do?
Right. So, as an example, when everybody knew that Change had an IT incident, you should have a process, because in the beginning, that's all they said was, we have an IT incident. That's everybody's first statement when they have a ransomware attack. Right.
Yeah.
All right. So then incident reporting, Fred.
Yes. Now this is where you're getting into, I'm a customer of Change, right? What does this mean? It could mean, maybe I'm going to be doing, because you're responsible if your data gets compromised by a vendor, a third party you have an agreement with, you have to notify, right? So you're waiting for notification, probably from Change, to say, this many of your records were compromised, none of your records, fingers crossed, all of your records, right? So you're waiting for this, what is going to happen, and what does that trigger responsibility-wise on us? And in fact, knowing this, you should probably be responding internally and preparing, knowing what's coming from Change, right? So there's the trickle down effect, and it could be a very small, insignificant, and small in quotes provider, like a collections agent for medical debt. The largest breach in 2022, medical debt collections company. Largest healthcare breach wasn't even in healthcare; it was in the debt collections industry, right? So understanding all your third parties and how they may impact your reporting and your potential risk and potential response activities is critical.
All right, Fred. Cybersecurity testing.
Yeah, so this one, it talks a little bit about sharing vulnerabilities and assets. It talks about pen testing. I put that under the vulnerability management. I don't know how you do vulnerability management without validation through testing and discovery through testing. So again, this is one of those ones I look at and I go, how do you do that without that? I guess maybe the one on the first page was about patch management. Again, you got to know what to patch. You got to be able to prioritize those things. So I don't see how you separate this one from the first page, the first thing about mitigating vulnerabilities.
Oh, speaking of mitigation.
and speaking of mitigation, right? Again, this is all these, if you put them together, it's leading to that. If you have a high risk vulnerability, you need to react as if it is an incident and remediate that vulnerability or mitigate the risk as rapidly as possible. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be just, vulnerabilities in tech. It could be people vulnerabilities as well.
Can I mention one thing here? I think it's really important as well that prioritization of vulnerabilities isn't solely on CVSS scores, isn't solely on exploitability metrics and things of that nature either. I think the business context or the patient context and the patient safety elements of the asset as well should lead be an input into vulnerability prioritization. So really quickly, if you have multiple different, 10,000 different CVEs and vulnerabilities to remediate, well, this is on a internet-facing system that is actively touching a patient or directly involved in a clinical process. That should probably take priority in a remediation or mitigation process. So I just wanted to lay that out. We keep seeing prioritized vulnerability. It's more than just the technical elements.
Yeah. All right, Fred, detect and respond to relevant TTPs.
Yeah, I love the last line in this. It says, able to secure entry and exit points to their network with endpoint protection. What are they saying here? They're saying just watching the network's not enough. Just doing EDR monitoring is not enough. Just monitoring the cloud's not enough. You need to monitor all these environments. You have cloud environments with workloads there. You have things happening on your network. You have IoT activity that you need to monitor. This is saying you need to look at everything, and they're calling it out for once. We know a lot of people and say, hey, I've got MDR, we're watching email. Well, you're watching this much of your attack surface, right? You need to watch all of it, right? And that's what this is telling you. You can't stop and say, you have to be able to fight for budget, right? They're telling you, fight for this budget. You got to have it, right? Network segmentation. You want me to just move on here, Jake, down to the next one?
Go for it. Yep.
Yeah, network segmentation critical. I know Mohammed is going to be the huge proponent of this. As he pointed out, the issues with IoT and Meta IoT are low power, may not be able to do all these security things, can't put an endpoint agent on it. How do you protect it? Well, you segment those off. They probably shouldn't be talking to the internet anyways. If you see them trying, maybe you have a problem with that particular device. Maybe it's crypto mining and trying to send some data out so they can make money, right? Centralized log collection. This has been central. Since I started in this space back, as Jake mentioned, when we were writing HIPAA, this is what we were spending the most time on, and we're still talking about it. Okay, you need to centralize your logs. You need to move them off the systems, hash them, and secure them, and have them accessible in some form. I'm not saying you need to be able to go in and get data in real time, but within half an hour or an hour, you should be able to get any data you need. Centralized incident planning and preparedness. Again, this talks about not just the plan, but it's really talking about the governance, the people, everybody. As we talked about in a healthcare organization, your TTE should be as equally focused, even maybe more focused on all the non-IT and technical folks. They're the ones that really need to know what happens. What do I do when I can't run an infusion pump? What happens? What do I do? Right? So they need to be part of that process. So making sure everybody from the top, so they have to make critical decisions in real time, down to the people that deliver care, to knowing what do I pivot to when things have gone wrong. And of course, configuration management, a cornerstone, right? It's always been a cornerstone of IT. It's always been a very difficult part of this. Where do we want to focus? Well, certainly with any system with sensitive or regulated data, got to focus there first. Then we spend time and try to get management under control of all the other devices we have in our environment.
All right. So, Mo, what's missing from these 20? You think it covers everything? You think it's good?
No, I think as a starting point, it's good. My whole thing is I think the scope has been maybe a bit too narrowly defined in some of these, as well as I know they're not numbered per se, but
I think we lost Mo there.
I think Mo got froze.
Yep, Mo froze. Well, Mo, you froze. Say that again.
All I'm going to say, just in the interest of time, I think the scope is a little too narrow, and I think some of the enhanced should actually be moved to the essentials to lay the groundwork. to be able to mature it in a more systematic way. I feel like it's a little bit fragmented right now.
Yeah, and this slide, by the way, comes from our presentation at AHA Rural, where we said, hospitals need to assess their current security posture against the CPGs. Let me just talk about why. Because your board members and your execs really get this. Like the fact that it's only 20, the fact that it's voluntary right now, like has captured people's attention. So, assess your security posture against this. You may need to address your technology to do this. We talked in the chat, you can see people putting various ideas. Fred talked some. If you have a robust in-house team, you can tackle this. If you don't, you got to get outside expertise. If you have a robust in-house team, having a platform like Armis is really helpful. And if you don't, having us manage that for you is something we do for other organizations. And Fred, can you just talk to people about how they measure progress on this and using a risk and compliance tool?
Yeah, at this point, you're going to have to still lean into the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is still a great idea if you want to sit and measure yourself against a standard and use a tool. There's no real tool out there that says, here's how you measure against the CPGs. They're very fluffy, to be honest. It is not written like a standard that you would measure against. So you can certainly build a work plan around the CPGs, but if you want to measure it, I'd suggest going to the NIST cybersecurity framework, because you're going to have to use that in healthcare for a risk assessment anyways. And best part of all, there's a crosswalk the government put out between the cybersecurity framework 2.0 and the CPGs. So you can actually see how the government sees that mapping, and you can then take it from there.
Yeah. And, to that end, one more reason to do this just out yesterday, people who follow one of these cyber frameworks, NIST CSF, get a cut in their healthcare insurance premium hikes. So pretty good reason to do that. And when we think about what we do, what Critical Insight does, as part of our managed XDR, as part of the MDR that's in the middle there, one of the things that we give people is a risk and compliance platform. It is included in the service. And so, in terms of looking at those 20 CPGs and how you measure them, we help you do that. And when you look at, our services and you think about the 20 CPGs, we help organizations with every single one of those. Either we can do it for you or we can give you the advice on how to get it done. Also, before we end, I want to give our email addresses, mine and Mo's, and I'm going to go to final thoughts here in a second because I know Mike has a spicy final thought here. He's not a fan. I'm going to also put out our survey. In every event we do, I give folks a survey. We'd really appreciate it if folks took the survey. We want to know how we did. Was it helpful? Curious to know, if this changed anyone's minds about what you're doing this year. And now we're going to do final thoughts. We're going to go Mo and then Fred and then Mike with the spicy one at the end. Go ahead, Mo. 30 seconds.
I think organizations, it's a great starting point. I think I would put asset inventory first by all means. I would probably have some different ways to or elaborate on prioritization capabilities. But I think, to what was mentioned earlier, really anchor yourself and use NIST as a maturity model to really make informed decisions on your security program.
Awesome. Fred, final thought.
Yeah. CPGs, I think they're yet another budgeting tool that you take to your board. You try to find out if this is the approach that's going to help you to get the budget you need, get the emphasis around these particular things. So I say it's another tool to get budget.
Mike.
First of all, I don't remember a public comment period, and I would have commented. I would have sliced these up much differently. For example, incident response is on the low end. Monitoring has to go with that. How do you know you have an incident in progress if you're not monitoring your damn network? Okay, this guidance is no different from any other, but the packaging just makes it more friendly, and that's not going to change the economics around the investments that you have to make to do the same things that you've been told to do all this time. All right. And lastly, I am amazed that there is nothing in here about efforts to devalue the records that keep getting stolen. If they're not worth anything, they won't get stolen. And that is a part of the national cybersecurity strategy and should have been called out here.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us. Our email addresses are on the screen. Please take the survey in the chat on behalf of Mo and Fred and Mike. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you.